All right, folks, I am back from vacation. So, time to restart the Q&As. First of all, shout out to my man Cody for the cool feedback here. Second, hopefully the Q&A regulars can forgive me for a 30 to 45 second advertisement here. But this year I have been working with 5, a max 10 people. That's the personal limit that I set for myself on the amount of individuals I would work with for coaching. But with this surgery coming up and a lack of other interesting projects on my plate, I'm looking to expand into full-time coaching again. Now, I'll be honest, I am primarily looking to work with individuals who are interested in a similar style of training to what I do, because there's some things that I want to test and build out. So basically, more higher intensity, lower volume, heavy emphasis on compounds and the 5 to 10 rep range. That said, I am cutting my prices in half. So if you've ever been thinking about working with me, now's a good time to do it. Will the Celtics still be able to come back and beat the Heat, or is it too little, too late? The funny thing about this question, it was actually asked when the series was still 2-0. So the Celtics since then went down 3-0 and now have roared back to bring the series to 3-2. Obviously, I think Miami will be favored to win Game 6 at home. But you know what? I'm going to do it. I'm sticking to my prediction. I'm going to say the Celtics become the first team in NBA history to complete the reverse sweep, the backdoor sweep. Celtics win in 7, becoming the first team in NBA history to come back from a 3-0 deficit. You heard it here first. If cardio fitness was an issue, how would you address it during a deficit? Would you do high-intensity interval training? So high-intensity interval training is going to have the most carryover to performance when you're actually lifting weights. But here's the issue. I just don't trust people to accurately diagnose a cardio issue. How do you know you have a cardio issue? Sometimes people say, I have a cardio issue. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? And they're like, well, when I'm doing sets of 20 on squats, I can't catch my breath. Well, yeah, no shit. And if you're dieting, your fitness should be improving. So if you're not doing any cardio at all and you have a very low step count, you can start by adding zone 3 or zone 2 cardio a couple times per week, like 3 to 4. Do you like the plate-loaded versions of most Strime Pride pieces more than the cable versions? Well, man, not to be a tremendous douche, but some of the cable versions are not heavy enough for me on the compound stuff. That said, I haven't actually tried all of them, and there's some of them that only come in the cable version that I think are really good. For example, they don't make a calf machine that's plate-loaded, but they do make a cable one, and it's one of the only ways you can do lengthened-biased calf work. The adductor machine is another example. The adductor machine is one of the only ways that you can, again, have an adjustable strength curve on your adductor work. They also make a pullover that isn't plate-loaded. It's only the cable version. So it just totally depends. On isolation movements, like the prime lateral, again, another one that's only with the cable. But for things like, say, curls or tricep extensions, I will never be able to max those out with plates, so the cable version is just fine. So it just depends, and it's on a case-by-case basis with each individual machine. Is the hip thrust a good hinge movement? Can it also be good for hamstrings? No, man, because here's the thing. The hamstrings aren't going to change length significantly in a hip thrust for 2 reasons. One, the entire movement is done pretty much with a very closed knee angle. And if you're doing it full range of motion, you'll even get changes in the knee angle and the hip angle at the same time, which is going to prevent the hamstring from lengthening because it's changing at both insertions. So if you're looking to get a lot of glute bias, that is really the only thing that I would do the hip thrust for. And a full range of motion hip thrust where your knees actually pull back and you go all the way to the ground, that will actually train your quads to a pretty significant degree, because you're going to start from somewhere pretty close at the bottom anyway to maximal knee flexion, where it's just going to be at least a lot of knee flexion. And then when you go to the top, you extend the knees quite a bit. So it will actually do more for your quads than your hamstrings. It's not a real hinge. Do non-pharmacy dosages of anabolics carry additional risks compared to pharmacy-dosed products? So the dose isn't really what matters, at least the milligrams per milliliter. That's not what carries additional risks from underground pharma. So no. And I think that's really what you're asking. The additional risk comes from contaminants, because the manufacturing process isn't as stringent. It isn't as under any regulations. It could be the proverbial guy cooking in his bathtub sort of a situation. So you run the risk of contaminants and also getting fake products or just something that's completely mislabeled. Is there any point to a Smith machine with a counterweight? So the only thing I can really think of, man, is it just gives you a tiny bit more flexibility in the starting weight. So if you had like elderly personal training clients or maybe somebody with an injury, they can start under, 20, 25 pounds, especially let's say on unilateral exercises or maybe like upright rows or something where you're doing really, really light weights. That said, let's be honest, the reason that most dudes use Smith machines with counterweights is because you can go load up 4 plates on a Smith machine with a counterweight and it's only 360 instead of 405. So it looks like you can do more than you can. After going to failure, do you also track partial reps? So I can fully admit that there are much, much, much better bodybuilders than me that never track a single goddamn thing. However, it's just like the antithesis of my personality. Why would you do something and not track it? I would always want to have an idea of what I did last time so that I can try to beat it in the future or at least be able to measure what's actually happening. So yes, personally, I do track rep attempts and partials. Why don't you shave your head and your beard so that you can spend more time making gains? I think I'm just going to answer this one with a picture. So as you can see here, troll-like creatures with steroid-induced moon face should probably not have a clean-shaven face and be bald. Is online coaching oversaturated, or do people just not stand out? I mean, this is like when people say that online dating is oversaturated. No, bro, you're not getting any matches because you're ugly. Like, and it's the same thing for coaches, man. Everybody wants the pretty girl or the pretty boy. Everybody wants to work from home on their laptop. It's a competitive thing. You got to be really good to succeed. Are there any bad effects from training your obliques besides aesthetics? This is a question to ask a bodybuilder, man, because the entire point of bodybuilding is aesthetics. So it's like, well, other than it making you worse at the sport that you're trying to be good at, is there any other reason you wouldn't do it? And no, there really isn't any other reason I wouldn't do it. I mean, from a functional perspective, it's probably a good idea to train your obliques and have them be stronger, just like any other muscle. Do you recommend behind the back laterals to everybody, or should you just try things and see what feels best to you? You should always try things and see what feels best to you, man. That's the number one most important rule in all of training. Now, that said, if we're talking about theoretical optimal nerdland, we know that behind the back laterals are going to provide more of a stretch on the side delt, whereas cable laterals in front of the body tend to not provide any stretch on the side delt unless you kind of lean over it and allow your arm to be dragged across the front of your body. We know that stretching in and of itself is hypertrophic. We know that training muscles in a lengthened position, as fully lengthened as we can get them, is probably a good idea, almost unilaterally. So again, on paper, behind the back laterals might be a little bit better choice. In reality, you have to go and try and see for yourself. You might find it a super awkward exercise or something. Do you have to maintain for at least half of the length of your diet, as Dr. Mike Israel recommends? Dr. Mike Israel doesn't recommend that. Some of you have real serious problems with understanding who particular advice is for. That particular advice is for general population clients who only care about weight loss and then want to keep that weight loss off. That is not advice for hardcore lifters at all. How do you prevent diet rebound? So I have 2 different answers to this question depending on who I'm talking to. If you're a serious hardcore lifter, like, just put the fork down, man. Like, you got to develop some discipline. Part of being a serious lifter, if you're going to get super lean, if you're going to diet quickly, any of these things, is that you have to be able to deal with hunger. And if you can't deal with hunger, like, you're just going to have to make it easier on yourself in other ways. And the other ways that I'm talking about, and this is the answer that I would give to general population individuals who are more concerned with weight loss, is slow the rate of your dieting down. Everybody wants to lose 3 pounds a week. No. Keep it to like 1 pound a week if you're having trouble with hunger at the end of your diets. Something like 0.5% to 1% of your body weight per week. Don't lose more than 10% of your body weight at any one time. Don't diet for more than 8 to 12 weeks at a time. And if you lose 10% of your body weight and you want to take more weight off, make sure you take a break about 6 to 8 weeks at maintenance calories before trying another weight loss phase. How long should a bulk last? Is there such a thing as bulking too slow? So, I mean, if you're a competitor, right, then you already have fixed timelines for how long that you can bulk. Because even if you stay very lean, you need to set aside at least 4 to 5 months a year for competition prep. Okay, now you start adding in deloads and vacations, and you only have 6 months a year to bulk. And that means you don't really want to waste any of it. You want to gain as much muscle as possible. So you're probably going to go for bulking rates that maybe lead to slightly higher fat gains, but yield maximal muscle returns. And the problem with bulks that are quote unquote too slow is that at a certain point, it becomes really difficult to measure. Like if you're trying to gain 0.2 kilos a week, which is, 0.4 pounds or something, you can get caught up in a situation where you're just measuring water fluctuations in body weight. You're just measuring variance, and you're not actually putting on any tissue. And at the end of 3 weeks, you realize, oh, my average body weight hasn't actually changed, and yet you've made no adjustments because it was your goal to gain 0.1, 0.2 kilos. However, I would be lying if I said it wasn't possible to gain 1 kilo a month. If you don't compete, there's no such thing as a bulk that lasts too long. I mean, if you could just bulk forever, theoretically, that would be freaking awesome, right? Let's just say you never got fat because almost all the weight that you gained was always muscle. You could just keep bulking it until you were 4,000 pounds and look like the Hulk after he transforms, right? So there is no time limit unless you're a competitor and you know that on a certain day, you're going to have a certain look on stage. For non-competitors, I mean, you could bulk for 2 years straight. Let's say you gain 1 kilo a month for 2 straight years. That's 24 kilos. At the end of the day, that's just over 50 pounds. If you do that across 2 years and you make massive strength gains, you'll probably need to diet at the end of it, but your physique will be completely and totally changed forever. So again, this will all just depend on your personal preferences. Theoretically, there is going to be a point at which bulking too slow, it's going to take longer than if you bulked faster and then dieted and then restarted again. But again, if you don't compete, then you're not on a timeline, so it really doesn't matter. This all will come down to personal preference, and if you went quote unquote too slow and cost yourself 6 weeks, it's just really not that big of a deal. For non-competitors, you just stop bulking when you feel you've gotten too fat. Is there any reason to do movements that are short biased if I can do lengthened biased movements for every single muscle? So we need to differentiate between training the short position and something that has a short biased strength curve. So training the short position can be done with exercises like leg extensions, preacher curls, machine chest flies, lying leg curls. However, all of these exercises, they can train the short position, which we should do because it's going to hypertrophy different muscle fibers than exercises that train the lengthened position. But we can do these short positions with lengthened biased strength curves, meaning I could use the strive lying leg curl with all the weight on the lengthened and train the short position with a lengthened biased strength curve. So here's what I'll say. Most people don't really need to worry about this at all. Let's just get that clear, right? If you row 185, 90 kilos, you're still going to get a hell of a lot out of taking your row to 315 or 140 kilos, and that's going to matter way more than the strength curve of anything. That said, if you are advanced or you just happen to have access to a lot of prime/strive equipment, I do think that the evidence that has been emerging favors the fact that you're going to, on a set per set basis, get more total hypertrophy when you use movements that have a lengthened biased strength curve. For example, there's a study right now directly comparing incline curls to preacher curls, and preacher curls actually produce more hypertrophy on a set per set basis, even though they train the short position, and incline curls train the fully lengthened stretched position because the preacher curls have more tension in the stretch position. So if you can find exercises that do a combination of both, those are usually going to be your biggest money makers. But again, don't overemphasize this stuff. All right, everybody, that is the end of the video, so you know what to do. Well, I'm talking really fast. That means you need to go and hit the like button if you liked the video. And if you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comment section below. Subscribe if you haven't already, and enjoy the rest of your weekend, because it's Friday.